was all these things I thought I didn't want to do. And then I finally found something like, oh, okay, that seems like something I could do.
I started falling in love with learning things. I can learn anything if I commit to a set of principles.
You can choose direction. You can choose to commit to actions. You can't choose the outcome. Right?
Correct.
It's like even once I committed myself in, someone had to offer me the role. Some of the worst things that have happened in our lives have been some of our greatest learning experiences. Even when you do everything right, sometimes the world puts obstacles in your way.
You have a brand. Okay, I'll say a few words. And let me know if people come in your head when I say this. Lazy, doesn't show up on time, doesn't deliver on class assignments, not a good friend. And everybody's sitting around like, yeah, I know people like that. You might start a company one day and you'll look back on that group of students and say, which one of them will I invite to be my finance manager? Because how they delivered in class. Interactions in this world are constantly communicating your brand. Protect it.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Unibeans. On today's episode, we have two very special guests who are working hard to improve the lives of students at UBC. We are grateful to have on the show Ainsley Carry, the VP of Students, and Tony Botelho, the Managing Director of the Career Center. With a bachelor's in economics and a master's in education, Ainsley Carry has a long and prestigious career as a student affairs director at world-class universities across North America. He joined us at UBC in 2019 and was recently renewed for another 4-year term. His work as the VP of Students involved intensive communication with students and the creation of the Student Strategic Plan, the first of its kind. Tony Botelho similarly has an exceptional career. Completing his master's in education in 2012, he has gone on to receive accolades and acknowledgments for his contributions and research surrounding the importance of career education in the contemporary university. After years spent working as a director of career services at SFU, he was recently brought on to manage the UBC Career Center in August of 2023. In this episode, they share the unique and insightful perspectives on finding our career paths, exploring options, and developing a personal brand, the importance of lifelong learning, and so much more. That's all for the intro. We really hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, everybody. I welcome you all to Unibeans, a podcast where we talk about personal and professional development and we transform and we sort of see how we can transform young individuals into young professionals. And I'm very glad and I'm very happy to introduce you all to Mr. Tony Botelho and Mr. Ainsley Carry. So my very first question to both of you all is, what was your career path like? Did this something that you wanted when you were our age, or what was it like? Yeah.
Tony, how about? All right, I'll start it
You
off.
go first. You go first.
So I think when I was a high school student getting ready to go to university, I was growing up in Miami, Florida, and I was a student athlete. So I wanted to continue to play my sport. So going to college was about the continuation of my sport. That was my first and primary interest.
Yeah.
And when I arrived in university, my first couple years, I was focusing on my sport. And I started falling in love with learning things. I started to realize that I can take the skills from my sport, getting up early, practicing, training, performing on the field, evaluating my performance. The next day, get up early, practice, train, perform, evaluate your performance. I started to say, if I adopted those skills in the classroom, what type of student would I be? So I started to do exactly that. Get up early, perform, train, examine, evaluate myself, come back the next day. And it took my experience from being a student athlete and being a student and realizing that I can learn anything if I commit to a set of principles around learning. So it started making me love learning. And I would actually say, ooh, what else can I learn by using this set of principles?
You were more curious about everything.
It made me curious about learning. So for me, that was kind of the beginning of my academic career. And then I started to realize I ought to help young adults learn how to do this. Yes. So that's what led me into college administration. This passion for saying, tell me your template for life, and I'll help you translate it into the classroom and see what type of successful student you can become. So that's how I ended up going into college administration, wanting to do for students the discovery that I had in my own head.
You've always had the idea of creating that impact.
Yes, the impact, and I was influenced by a lot of people in my life who helped me do things that I didn't know I could do, people who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I wanted to be that person that saw the thing in someone else that they didn't see and encourage them to move on.
Yeah, and let me tell you, we're having an amazing time at UBC with all the events happening here. What about you, Tony?
It was interesting. I hadn't actually thought until you described Miami that I actually grew up on the north coast of BC. So we could almost not have been farther apart.
Yeah.
That connection.
Yes.
But I think we both share the fact that we have immigrant parents. And so I grew up in a small town in northern British Columbia. And I didn't have a very sophisticated thought process. At some point towards the end of high school, I had an accounting teacher say that I was pretty good in accounting because I did well in accounting in high school. I was always pretty good with math. And I took this
math.
Yeah. It's you know, it can be relatively fun for me still. And it was like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. So I was like, okay, I'll be an accountant. So that was my entire thought process, is like, you know, there was all these things I thought I didn't want to do for various reasons. And then I finally found something like, oh, okay, that seems like something I could do.
Yeah.
And also, again, as someone who's a child of immigrants, you know, it was clear cut. It was something my family could understand. And then, so I went into my undergrad, and it was my full intention until I took my first accounting course. And I realized I'm actually not that good at this. Like, I wasn't bad at some of it. Like, the first half of the course I did really well. Second half, it was a real struggle. And so it was one of my many points in my life where I was thinking of going a certain direction, and some sort of factor made me go, okay, that's not it. It's a hard thing to go through, because not only, like, for me, it's like, you know, I liked black and white. I didn't know what else there was to do. And also my parents, you know, mostly my mom, you know, not only, she loved telling her friends that her son not only was going to be an accountant, was an accountant. In her mind, I was already it. Right? So the fact that I had to switch, I had to deal with myself, but I also now had to deal with this conversation with my family and all of that stuff. So that's a lot on a, 19, 20-year-old.
Yeah.
But it was then also useful, because once that was out of the way, I can now be open to other things. And I just did stuff, and I tried stuff, and it took a while to find things. Eventually I graduated, and I still, you know, had ideas of doing international development stuff, but I had no skills to offer. And so at a certain point, you just take what lands. And you know, it was one of those situations where I had a first job after university, where I was basically a support person in a disability office. And then that, because of, you know, being lucky enough to have a really great supportive boss, that opened up to other opportunities, which led me to a position, you know, at Simon Fraser University, which then led to other positions. But I moved around, and almost every position I went for was at some point before that I said, I don't think I'd want to do that. But something either externally or in me changed. And so when I think of how we support students, so much of that, and now that I know more of the research behind career development and students, so much of it is this acknowledgement of uncertainty, acknowledgement of things are going to change, but how do we put ourselves in situations where good things can happen, and be open and flexible and curious for those opportunities?
You know, I think it's like very inspiring, because as an international student, I know that coming from a background where people always prefer, oh, you might go in consulting and all these like conventional jobs, but taking the courage to say, no, this is what I like, giving that thought, you know, having a lot of uncertainty, but still taking up the courage to say, I want to do this. I think it's very inspiring, and I'm you know, this story is just, I think all of you was pretty very impressed, so thank you so much for sharing that. Adding on to it, what were some of the significant challenges that you faced throughout your career journey and career path?
Would you like to start off this time?
Yeah, I think in terms of some of the challenges, I would say right off the bat, as a new graduate, I had trouble finding work, right? Which is also something that has influenced me, you know, as I've gone to the work. So I have very deep empathy for the struggle that can happen in transition, right? Transitions, by their very definition, are challenging, right? It's always just the way it is, because something ends, right? And we often think of the thing that's next, but we have to acknowledge that there's always something that ends before that next thing comes in. And, you know, I happened to graduate during a period where the economy wasn't particularly strong, and so it was just challenging. And my approach to work and everything was not particularly sophisticated. My family and all the connections I had were in a community, hundreds of kilometers away. So I was trying to find myself, and I realized, I had a bit of experience. I was, a relatively decent student, but I didn't have some of those connections, and I didn't have a very sophisticated approach, right? So I would say, as an initial challenge, that was probably one of the biggest ones. And again, but it's also influenced, a lot in terms of my, the work I've gone into and how we approach things. And I would say, and somewhere, I've been fortunate to have only had what I would say, I was watching, one really terrible boss and one dysfunctional workplace. Luckily for me, it was only about a year and a half.
Yeah.
But knowing you can survive that, like all of us, going through difficult things, it's not fun in the journey, but then, you always learn something from it. And you also appreciate when you have something good. So I think that's some of the stuff I'll say.
Well, thanks. I can identify two challenges that I've had in my career development process. One, probably Tony identifies with this story as well. I was a first generation college student. So I was the first member of my family to go to university. So I didn't have someone at home saying, oh, Ainslie, you might want to take this class. Hey, Ainslie, visit this professor. Hey, Ainslie, remember, to register for this. Hey, don't forget this internship. So I went through my university experience without a piece of advice from someone in my family that was tapping me on the shoulder. So by the time I learned about things, it was usually too late to benefit from it. So I kind of had like a 75% of the university experience. I enjoyed myself there. I learned a tremendous lot. So I accepted my first job out of university, again, still lacking that advice, right? Still not only being a first generation college student, but now being a first generation graduate entering the workforce. Yes. So no one in my family was able to say, you should perhaps negotiate your salary this way. You have a degree in this, so you shouldn't take these jobs. You should focus on these jobs. And be patient in the application process, because it's going to take a little while. In the meantime, just come and stay home and work on dad's job. So I didn't have that type of backup plan. It was all on me. Right? So I had completed a degree. I needed to be in the workforce. So many of the elements of being the first generation to do something, I made all those mistakes. I bought a car with almost no money down. I purchased an apartment that I couldn't afford. When I started to see my paycheck, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to afford this apartment I just purchased? Because you forget what you didn't know, I didn't know, to subtract all the taxes out of my income. So I just took my annual salary, divided it by 12, and I was like, great, I can get this apartment. And then the taxes hit, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, I can't get this apartment. But it was too late, I already had it. So I had to do a lot of figuring out, and I made all those first generation graduate mistakes, right? Like the lessons don't stop from your first generation experience. So I thought that was a significant challenge for me. In my first role, I was an assistant store manager in a retail operation, a gigantic retail operation, global retail operation. I hated it. And that experience catapulted me back to graduate school, but more importantly, it made me ask the question, what do I really enjoy? Like when I go back to graduate school, I need to be able to articulate to people, I'm coming back because I want to do what? Mm-hmm. So I was able to say, I enjoy helping young people make meaning out of life. Like, what degree program is that? They're like, that's exactly the words I said. And they said, oh, it sounds like you'd be interested in higher ed with a counselor education background. And I just trusted it. I just trusted this person knows I have described my situation, and I am hoping that this person and God are working together to guide me into the right thing, right? And in my first semester, almost in my first few classes in the master's degree in counseling, I said, this is it. Like, I wanted to read about it. I wanted to write about it. So I learned, more importantly, my retail experience helped me understand what I didn't want to do. And going back to graduate school and finding myself in a degree program helped me identify what I did want to do. So I find equal value in finding out what you don't want to do. And by experiencing it. It's hard for someone to tell you. It's hard for you to read about it in a magazine. It was best for me, and it's my best piece of advice, to go and try things. take an internship somewhere, and then come back confirm that this is not what you want to do, or come back confirm this is what I want to spend my life doing. And you have time to change. So I think my challenges were everything related to being a first generation student and a first generation employee, but life experiences, as long as you're willing to say yes, things will take shape for you.
Yeah, and what was your mindset at that point of time? Because like now as a first year student, I know the struggles going on with my peers and myself as well. Like, it's like a lot of impatience combined with, oh, I want to do that, I want to do that, I want to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And so I always keep experimenting.
Yeah.
But I'm like, will it work?
Yes.
Will I make a living out of it?
Yes.
And all that. So how do I present myself in a way? Where do I start? What should be my first, as first years, or maybe in university? Where should I start?
Yeah. So here's my piece of advice on this, and I talk to a lot of students who express the exact same thing that you just expressed, right? Students stress out over, am I picking the right major? Am I at the right university? Am I taking the right internship? So much of the career experience, life experience, is about trying something, right? Let me take a class. Let me walk into a bookstore. Let me watch a movie. Let me read a book. Let me visit a country with a friend. So much of your life's journey are messages that are trying to get your attention, right? So someone told me once, when you walk into a bookstore, where do you naturally gravitate to? It's not for school, it's I'm here, I've got a break, I'm with a friend, I walk into a bookstore. That thing that you naturally gravitate to has a message about what you're interested in doing. It's a message about your life. It's a message about what you naturally gravitate to. So I often, now that, some years later, I think to myself, find work that doesn't feel like work. Do the thing, don't worry about the money yet, but find the thing that doesn't feel like work. For me, working as a college administrator, this is my job. I'm talking to students all day long. I'm helping them solve problems.
Yeah.
This does not feel like work to me, right?
It's like normal for you.
Yeah.
Like me hanging out with Tony, right? So all day long, I get to hang out with college students, right? So
And Tony.
and Tony.
But he does want to get paid for that part.
But I would, it never feels like work. It always feels like I'm just me. Even when it's intense, even when students are angry about something they're trying to move forward, I'm listening. I'm saying, all right, let's try to figure that out. And then I go home and I'm sitting and I'm doing the same thing with my family. So I always find that work, right? So let that lead you. Try things and be okay with them failing, right? And say, oh, next time I'll do this tweak. Let me try that again. Next time I'll do this tweak. If you read any works of serial entrepreneurs, boy, they've tried dozens of ideas before
And
one
failed.
worked, right?
Yeah.
Einstein, trying to do the light bulb, but failed 3,000 times before he got it to work. Like you would, Michael Jordan missed, 2,000 shots, right? Like, so I think there's a lot about life that's about trying things and being persistent and not giving up, but also not being overly stressed out about, I'm wasting my time. No time is wasted. You're actually learning about what's going on. So failure is only lessons. So keep learning.
Yeah. What about you, Tony?
Yeah, I would say, a lot of good stuff. And again, and I'll bring in, some of the career lens. Like there's a theoretical framework that influences a lot of our work. It's called the chaos theory of careers.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about chaos not in terms of things are chaotic. It's just, there's an understanding of what a chaotic pattern is. There is actually patterns, but they only make sense when you look back.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
You
true.
can't, that's why it's almost impossible to predict things moving forward. And often at its simplest form, they say there's two main things to look at when you're moving forward. One is mindset, right, which is, I thought was such a great question, and the other is action. So it's the marriage of mindset and action that I think is really critical as you move, for anyone, particularly at your stage. And one of the key things of mindset, and as was mentioned earlier, maybe it's going to be the word of the podcast, is curiosity, right? And this is the stage, this is the time of life to be curious and to be open, to be flexible, to try things. And again, I love that. Like, this is like why this institution is so amazing. All sorts of wonderful course options, but there's so many amazing things to do outside of courses, right? Like there's 8 billion clubs, there's stuff in the city, there's things to explore, there's events going on, and and you never know which thing, which interaction, which stuff is the thing that you go later, oh wow, that is what this led to this, which led to that, which led to that. But with that mindset, again, as I said, is action. So again, all this, you can be thinking in all this time, but unless you're actually then engaged, that's, so okay, so it's having that curiosity, but then, okay, but now I'm gonna commit to doing something, right? And so where our office comes in is we like to put some structure around that actually. So one of the things we talk about is we get people to think about possibilities, like, or help people identify. We're not generally get people to think about specific jobs or occupations, because that can change, right? And as example from our lives, most people don't end up doing what they think they're gonna do, right? So, but it's useful to have something to aim towards, right? Because when you have something to aim towards, then you can start putting some intentional strategy, right? Some intentional actions. And again, sometimes it's the random actions that are actually the most valuable. So those are good too. But let's put some intention behind these activities. And then, and just see, you know, where that move may move and go forward. And again, what we find is, you know, as you act, sometimes you keep going in the direction because it's positive. Sometimes you act and you have things that are like, ugh, right? We've had experiences like,
terrible boss.
Terrible boss. This is not for me. Or I'm really excited about something, but there's no opportunities right now. Right? Sometimes there's external forces that are just, no matter what I try, that's not there. So I need to. So it's always a combination of internal and external reasons why we shift. But I would argue, when we engage in things, particularly intentionally, the most common outcome is we become aware of other stuff, right? Like you do things, and as you become aware of other things, like how I didn't even know this, and now I'm excited about this, right? Like all the things you do, things like I didn't know this was a thing, or someone does that. So yeah, so I think particularly early on, that open-mindedness, the curiosity, and which again you're demonstrating by being involved in it, is and go and do stuff, right? And connect with human beings who you're interested in, and good things come.
Two things. Oh, I'm sorry. Two things I want to mention. We can't forget one of the elephants in the room is that we have pressure from students, have pressure from our parents, right? So there are some real parental expectations on. I've worked this hard. I've saved this much money to send you to this university so you can major in this and become a doctor, engineer, or lawyer, right? So a lot of students are here with that real pressure from parents. So this conversation that we're having about exploring an opportunity and, you know, pursue your passion is difficult for some students to absorb because they're saying, my parents have spent a lot of money to send me here to be a doctor, so I better deliver on that. So that's a real pressure that needs to be acknowledged, and we need to help students find the courage and a path for having that conversation with their parents. Some parents will say, look, I just want you to be happy. Some parents will say, no, I want you to be an engineer. We have to help students navigate that conversation as part of the path to their interests. Now, some students will pursue their path secretly behind their parents and then find a way to still become a doctor on the side or tell their parents in the end. But I think we should take time to acknowledge that as a real pressure. What are the expectations of my parents and my community that's making it hard for me to explore the universe of options? Because why I think this universe of options thing is so important, one of the reasons that the United States and other countries explore space isn't because there's something specific out there. It's because of all the science and technology that goes into the effort, produces products, right? So many things that are part of space exploration, satellites, laptop computers, phones, science, engineering, math, you name it, was a product of trying to put a man on the moon, right? So microwaves came from what we learned from space travel. Calculators, phones, all these things were products. So how do I bring that into life? When you're aiming for something, you may not reach that star, but boy, when you end, you're in a pretty cool place. So I enjoy the journey and helping students see that, but again, you can't see the journey until you look back at it and say, wow, I'm glad I tried for this incredibly difficult thing. I didn't become a doctor, but boy, I'm helping a lot of people in healthcare in a different way.
Fully time machines is immense. But coming back to the point of opportunities, I wanted to add in that I've heard of this like red car theory, where in general a person won't like notice red cars maybe like if I say like red cars, one won't notice it, but if I'm like, I'll pay you $5 for each red car you notice, people will find and specifically find red cars. I think opportunities come that way in life, and that's what, sort of always trying to look for. Again, be curious.
Yes.
That's sort of the idea behind it. And now,
And I would say,
yeah,
and again, back to all the various things to acknowledge,
yeah,
that does exist, and there's some evidence and there's some theoretical frameworks around
Mhm.
that, right? In North America,
yes,
generally speaking, opportunities are gentler and kinder to people who look like me, right? And that's
Mhm.
also a thing for us to acknowledge,
Mhm.
that if we sometimes individuals, we need to do different things.
correct.
We as institutions also have responsibilities to try and shift things. Otherwise, we just perpetuate some of the same patterns that we've seen in the past, and I don't think that's what any of us want.
Yeah, I think institutions like UBC sort of help us so much in a way that we interact with people from all over the world, sort of network and understand what the market is, and then, yeah, UBC is really the best. Coming back to UBC, what do we have some plans for the next semester, for the next year, in terms of how we're going to shape the student life or the career development sort of portion? Like, I got so emotional when the international portion came up, because like, yes, that's like every parent is like,
Yes.
specifically my parents are like, yes, we like, you can do whatever, but I know inside that they will be so happy when I'll have Deloitte or some, like, they will be so happy, but they want to support me. But again, as you said, my parent, like your mom was like, oh, my son's an accountant, my mom will not stop about like Deloitte, but I know that, oh my god. And like, so I was like, my emotions, all the international students' emotions, just like, yes. So about UBC, what are some future plans?
All right.
Well, we just were actually having some conversations around this morning around the Career Center. So some of the things, what we're looking to do is, back to my earlier point, is acknowledging that there are certain populations that don't do as well in terms of employment outcomes that we know of. So let's get some focused support. Let's get some expertise built into our Career Center. We're intending to hire a leader of, what we're currently calling, some sort of inclusion or focus team, where we can start looking at the specific needs of students with disabilities, Indigenous students, or Indigenous and Black students, other racialized students. Looking at what it is that we already offer, how do we make sure that it's accessible and appropriate for all of those students so they can thrive in those environments? How can we, in our interactions with employers, support them to make sure the types of opportunities they're offering are accessible, culturally appropriate, safe, that they understand what it means to be a supervisor in the current age. And then where necessary, what are some focused or targeted initiatives that we may want to start? Because there's just there's just a gap here and here, and okay, let's look at that. So I think that's one of the ones I think we're most excited about.
Nice.
I'd add to that. Tony's not bragging on himself, so I'll brag about him a little bit. So 2 years ago, we began a national search for a national leader in career development. We wanted to make the career development experience at UBC the best in the nation. We wanted students to choose UBC in part because of the great things they were hearing about how we get you ready to compete in a global employment market. So that was our intention, going out, searching all of Canada and the United States for a national leader in this space, so that they can come in and describe what the future looks like, and we can invest in it for our students. So after 2 years of searching, Tony Botelho emerged to the top of this stack. Everywhere we went, people were saying, that's not the job for me, but have you met this guy named Tony yet? Hey, that's not the job for me, but have you guys talked to Tony yet? So eventually his name came up so many times that we said, let's reach out to him. And Tony wasn't applying at the time, but we tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, would you consider this? And he kind of, let me see, I don't know, hemming and hawing. But we kept selling him this vision about, we want to be the best in the world. We want to make sure that the students who come to UBC choose UBC in part because of what this center is doing. So our Career Center will soon be connected and aligned and collaborating with all of our faculties so that a student will find a path to their career development no matter what discipline they're in. We have a current university model where, depending on which discipline you're in, you have different types of supports. We want to make sure that, in addition to specialized groups getting special support, we want to make sure every student feels connected, engaged. Tony introduced me to a term like career development is structurally unavoidable. Like, as you land on campus, you go to orientation, you live in a residence hall, you're eating in dining spaces, you're going to your classes, you're being introduced to the principles and concepts of career development. So by the time you get ready to graduate, boy, we've had 4 years of interactions with you to help you think about career development and your own journey and what you want to produce. So for me, the most exciting thing is about being the best in the world at this thing about helping students develop their careers, and letting one of the reasons students choose UBC is because of what we do in career development.
That is true. Even one of the reasons that I chose UBC is because I loved how the campus in general gives so much opportunities to especially an international student like me. I never thought I'd start a podcast. You have no idea. Even my mates, even my team, I've been like excited about this podcast for about 2 months now. I remember my finals are going on. I'm like, I don't want to study Math 101. I have a podcast coming now. I just want to get over with it. The amount of opportunities the space offers individuals like you inspire us to become, at that position where we like, yes, UBC has helped us a lot.
Yeah.
And moving forward, I think I personally I'm like, now I'm going to develop those skills. I'm excited to be responsible and accountable for my own career.
Yeah.
I will be, I will be networking with individuals, talking with individuals, and it's all thanks to UBC.
Yeah.
And this section, and one of my last questions would be, what is one piece of advice that you'll sort of give individuals like us who's like, we want to do something? Yeah.
Can I sort of step in? I'm going to do a mix.
Uh-huh.
Okay, because I'm going to take your point, because I love your thing about taking accountability, because that's wonderful.
Yes.
We want you to do. One of the things that we like to also talk about is this notion of choice, because it's around taking accountability, but don't put too much, don't put false pressure on yourself. We like to use this concept of you can choose direction, you can choose to commit to actions, you can choose to have a more positive mindset. You can't choose the outcome. Right? At some point, somebody else is involved, right? Like, even in this, at some point, Ainsley had to choose me, right? Like, even once I committed myself in, someone had to offer me the role, right? Someone has to accept me into med school. Someone has to accept me into a teacher college. So there's a certain point you put yourself into situations, and there's at a certain point you do your best to put yourself in a situation where these things can happen, and then there's a point where that it is no longer your choice, right? And I've seen people beat themselves up over what have I done wrong, what have I done, or like something, or this sort of blame, and it's like sometimes like the world's not always fair, right? And processes aren't always perfect. Right, like the interview process aren't necessarily perfect. Application processes into a particular grad school or professional school aren't perfect. It's not like everyone who got in is like better than anyone who got out. There's always going to be something, right? So, but as these things occur in life, so again, aim for things, right? Use something to aim towards, and know that sometimes, like, keep going, and knowing that sometimes there's going to be setbacks, and that's okay. Each of those setbacks, as we've talked about, are learning opportunities. Like some of the worst things that have happened in our lives have been some of our greatest learning experiences, right? And the things that we sort of, this has helped us somewhere else. So because you're already so curious, because you're already so engaged, like the stuff that I would normally encourage people to do, it sounds like you're already doing. So I would just say, pat yourself on the back, and just keep, seeing where this goes, but also know that, at various points, even when you do everything right, sometimes the world puts obstacles in your way, and it's just there. And then with each one you deal with, you're going to get better the next time you deal with another one.
Yes, failures are a part of your success.
Yes.
What about you?
It's hard to pick one piece of advice, and so
Yeah.
Tony gave you three. I'll try to find one. But one of the things that I think about, I'll try at least two. One is reminding students, reminding all of us that we are a brand. So I'm reminded that Starbucks, Nike, Apple, Deloitte, Mercedes, all of those are brands, and we get that. And they spend millions, if not billions, of dollars to protect the brand. So I couldn't open a coffee shop and call it Ainsley Bucks, right? And use a somewhat Starbucks-like logo. They would call me and say, cut that out right now. If I don't cut it out, their lawyers will come to meet with me and they'll spend millions of dollars in courts to get me to remove my fake Starbucks. Because they know that consumers who suddenly confuse their product with my product dilutes their product, not mine. So the reason that I say brand is so important, I would encourage students to protect their brand. You're not Starbucks, you're not Nike, but you have a brand. So everywhere you go, every time you communicate, when you show up to class on time, when you show up to class late, when you're part of a group and you don't do your assignment, that is a communication to the world about your brand. When you communicate via email and you don't spell everything out, you don't use proper punctuation, that's part of your brand. Your social media profile and all the things that you have on the social media, that's part of your brand. Nearly 100% of employers will check social media before they make a hiring offer. And your weekend at the beach with your buddies and your night at the frat house with your friends, all of that shows up in your images, and that's part of your brand. So as students are preparing to think about the next stages in the world, think about everything that you do as part of your brand, even how you deliver on projects with a team of students. Because guess what? One of those members of that team might own a company one day and ask you to join them. But if you didn't follow through on that class project, they're going to be saying, are we sure we want him to join us on this project? Or you might start a company one day and you'll look back on that group of students and say, which one of them will I invite to be my finance manager? Because how they delivered in class. So remember, your interactions in this world are constantly communicating your brand. Protect it like Mercedes and Nike and Starbucks and all the entities that think about a brand. You have a brand that you can value. And then the last thing that I'll mention is be wary of conventional wisdom. My generation, Tony's generation, I mean, we can give advice based on what we know was best when we were coming up. And you should listen to that. But you should also say, you know what, things have changed. So maybe that piece of advice, I'll have it in my mind, but I'm not going to be overly committed to it. So your parents will give you advice. You know, your colleagues will give you advice. And it's conventional wisdom. It is how it used to work. It might be slightly different. So we see some of the best entrepreneurs in the world saying, I listened to a bunch of people, but then I went and blazed my own path. And sometimes that's successful, specifically because they went and blazed their own path. Like no one would have described the iPhone before Steve Jobs and Apple came up with it. We would have never said, I want this thin device that can fit in my pocket. I want it to have a glass screen on it that I can touch and move. We would have never described that. So Jobs says, you know, kind of you have to anticipate where you want to take the customer to, right? No one would have described those things. So I am encouraging, you know, students to also be wary of what advisors would say. You know what, when I was growing up, this is how we did it. That's good to know, but also be cautious about that, because sometimes students hold on to that and it creates a barrier in front of their ability to do something in a whole new universe where you have access to tools that we didn't have access to. AI was not part of my career development experience in college or high school, right? So it is part of your experience. How might you leverage that in a world that we didn't have? So be wary of conventional wisdom and remember that you are a brand.
Yeah, 80% of our lives is AI. Most of our assignments AI. I was not supposed to tell you that, but hey, that's so heart touching that you are your own brand. I never thought that. Wow, that's a new perspective, because the moment you realize, okay, Nike and Adidas and you yourself as well.
You are a brand.
You are your own brand. I'm gonna put it in my room today.
Yeah, you know, and I'll have this conversation that I'll say, you know, I'll show people all those symbols, and I say, when you see McDonald's, what do you think? And 100 words come up. Hey, when you see Nike, what do you think? And words come up. Mercedes, what do you think? Apple, what do you think? And then I say, okay, then I'll show like celebrities, like Tiger Woods, Oprah Winfrey, Bill Clinton, Justin Trudeau, you know, and then, oh, they've got words for them. And then I say, what about you? How do people describe you? And everybody's saying, I'm not a celebrity, nor am I a brand. And then I say, okay, I'll say a few words. And let me know if people come in your head when I say this. Lazy, doesn't show up on time, doesn't deliver on class assignments, not a good friend. And everybody's sitting around like, yeah, I know people like that. And I'm saying, somebody is saying that about you. You may not be Michael Jordan, but you are a brand. And people around you know exactly who you are. And they will make decisions about their future in your life based on the experiences they're having with you right now. So be thoughtful.
Yeah, when I become an entrepreneur, hopefully I'm going to take revenge from the person who did not do anything in my Math 100 group. I had to do all my assignments.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
We've come to the end of it, and I'm very grateful. I think our viewers will be very grateful as well, because this piece of insight, we've never gotten all the podcasts combined. The amount of, we've always wanted someone who knows all of this, who understands our perspective. Both of you really understand what's going on at UBC, even non-UBC students, like what's going on in our mind right now, what's the uncertainty and confusion.
Yeah.
Myself, I'm more inspired and more, I'm like, I want to do this. I'm going to be more enthusiastic as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And we have a joke. Luke, you want to make that joke? It's like this.
Why did the espresso keep checking its watch? Guesses?
To make sure it stayed on time.
Because it was pressed.
It's press for time. Nice.
That's close to a dad joke, right? Like Tony,
That
I
is
thought
the
you
point.
would've-
That is the point. Like, we make dad jokes with. Well, yeah, I laugh. Thank you so much.